Elena stepped into the apartment, the faint hum of the city seeping through the towering windows that framed the skyline. Neon lights pulsed beyond the glass, their glow spilling across the sleek hardwood floor and the minimalist furniture. A low glass table, a charcoal rug, a couch that anchored the room. She let her bag slip from her shoulder, the weight of her shift at the hospital, easing as she flexed her fingers, still faintly scented with the sterile tang of latex gloves. Her white nurse's tunic clung to her frame, the fabric tailored to trace the gentle curve of her waist and hips, its crisp edges a bright contrast against her tanned skin. She smoothed it absently, feeling the hem brush her thighs, then reached up to free her blonde hair from its workday knot. It tumbled down in loose waves, brushing her shoulders and catching the light as she adjusted the delicate silver necklace at her throat. A thin chain with a small pendant, a gift from her husband that felt heavier tonight. Across the room, Daniel sprawled on the couch, one leg stretched out, the other bent as he scrolled through his phone. His dark hair fell in a tousled mess over his forehead, and his lean frame filled out a faded black t-shirt and jeans with a casual ease that made the space feel smaller. He glanced up as she crossed toward the kitchen, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Hey, Elena. Think I messed up my leg earlier." He winced, clutching his calf with exaggerated care, his lips twitching as if suppressing a laugh. She paused, one hand on the counter, her hazel eyes narrowing. "You're a terrible actor," she said, but her tone softened as she moved toward him, her flats tapping lightly against the floor. Duty tugged at her. She was a nurse, after all, and he was family, even if only by marriage. Kneeling beside the couch, she set her hands on his leg, her fingers brushing the denim before finding the bare skin of his calf. The muscle tensed under her touch, warm and solid, and she pressed gently, testing for strain. Her tunic pulled taut across her back as she leaned in, the fabric stretching just enough to remind her of its fit. "Where does it hurt?" she asked, her voice steady, professional. He grinned, a flash of teeth that unraveled her focus. "Guess it's not that bad," he admitted, his hand dropping away as he shifted upright, closer now, too close. Her pulse flickered, a quick jolt she couldn't place, and she straightened, brushing her palms against her thighs, as if to reset the moment. But his gaze held hers, dark, unguarded, lingering past the edge of harmless, and the air thickened, the room shrinking to the space between them. "Daniel," she started, her voice a warning she didn't fully mean, but he reached out, his fingers curling lightly around her wrist. The contact was soft, almost tentative, yet it anchored her there, her flats rooted to the floor. She should have pulled away, every instinct screamed it, but her hand stayed, her skin prickling where his thumb rested. "You don't need me to fix anything," she said, quieter now, her eyes flickering to the necklace glinting at her collarbone, a silent tether to the life she knew. "Maybe I just needed you here," he replied, his tone low, teasing, but threaded with something heavier. He tugged gently, and she let herself sink onto the couch beside him, the cushions giving under her weight. Her tunic rode up slightly, exposing a sliver of thigh, and she tugged it down, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her calm. He was so near now, his shoulder brushing hers, the faint scent of his cologne curling into her senses, woodsy and warm, that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Her breath caught, a hitch she couldn't mask, and she turned to face him, intending to reclaim the distance, the role she'd always played. Stepmother, caregiver, safe. But he leaned in, closing the gap, his hand sliding from her wrist to her arm, a slow, deliberate path that made her chest tighten. Her mind raced, her husband's laugh, their quiet dinners, the vows she'd made, but her body stayed, caught in the pull of his nearness. His face was inches from hers, his breath brushing her lips, and then he closed the space. Their lips met, soft at first, a question she didn't answer with words. She froze, her hands hovering, then pressed them to his chest, feeling the steady thump beneath his shirt. The kiss deepened, bold and unyielding, and she sank into it, the cushions dipping as he shifted closer, one hand cupping her jaw, the other resting on her hip. Time blurred, the city's hum fading to a dull pulse beyond the glass. Her blonde waves tangled where his fingers grazed them, her tunic creasing against her skin as she pressed into him. Every boundary she'd built, every line of duty, loyalty, family, crumbled in that kiss, leaving her suspended in the moment. When they finally stilled, her hands lingered on his chest, the fabric soft under her palms, the couch a quiet witness to the shift she couldn't undo. Elena sat motionless on the couch, her lips still alive with the ghost of Daniel's kiss, a warmth that lingered like an echo she couldn't silence. Her blonde hair, once smooth and flowing, hung in soft disarray, strands catching where his fingers had brushed her scalp moments before. The white tunic she wore, crisp and pristine hours ago, now bore the marks of their closeness, wrinkles fanning across her lap, one sleeve shoved up past her elbow, the fabric clinging to her skin where her arm pressed against the cushion. Her legs were tucked beneath her, a tight coil of tension, and she felt the heat of him, mere inches away, radiating through the space between them. The apartment stretched around them, its wide windows framing a city that pulsed with indifferent life, the neon glow casting faint patterns across the hardwood floor and the low glass table nearby. Daniel's hand rested on the cushion, his fingers splayed casually, yet every line of him carried a quiet intensity. His dark eyes locked onto hers, searching, probing, as if peeling back the layers she'd spent years building. The stillness between them crackled, charged with the unspoken truth. He was her stepson, a boundary she'd crossed with that kiss, a line that should have held firm. Yet the pull was there, magnetic and relentless, tugging at her senses. She could feel the warmth of his thigh near hers, the couch dipping slightly as he shifted closer, the faint creak of the frame breaking the silence. "Elena," he said, his voice low and unguarded. Not the tone he used when asking for advice or joking over breakfast, but something raw, something that named her as more than she'd ever been to him. Her mind spun, a chaotic whirl of images. Her husband's easy smile over dinner, the clatter of plates in their kitchen, the steady rhythm of her hospital rounds, lives she'd stitched together with care. This was wrong, a betrayal that gnawed at her chest, yet her body betrayed her thoughts, leaning toward him as if drawn by some unseen force. She pressed her palms into the cushion, her fingers sinking into the fabric, willing herself to stand, to walk away, but the gravity of their secret held her fast. His hand lifted, hesitating, then traced a slow line along her arm, thumb brushing the inside of her wrist, up to the crook of her elbow. Her skin tightened, a ripple of sensation she couldn't ignore, and she caught her breath, her resolve fraying like thread pulled too tight. The room seemed to shrink, the hum of the city beyond the glass fading to a dull throb. She saw herself in fragments, the nurse who mended broken bodies, the wife who kept a home steady, the stepmother who'd offered guidance. Healing was her craft, her purpose. Yet here she was, breaking something she couldn't name, something she might never mend. His touch lingered, light but insistent, and she felt the weight of her necklace shift against her collarbone, the silver pendant a cold reminder of vows now distant. Her husband's face flickered in her mind, his quiet trust, the way he'd loop an arm around her after a long day, and guilt surged, sharp and unyielding. But then Daniel's gaze softened, his fingers pausing at her wrist, and the illicit ache flared brighter, drowning out the noise. He shifted again, closing the gap until his knee brushed hers, the denim rough against the bare skin where her tunic had ridden up. The couch groaned faintly, a sound that mirrored the strain in her chest. She could smell him now, woodsy cologne mingling with the warmth of his skin, and it coiled into her senses, tugging her deeper into the moment. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice a hushed challenge, his hand hovering near hers. The words hung there, a lifeline she could seize, a way back to the woman she'd been before tonight. But her lips parted, and no sound came. Only silence, thick with confession, as her fingers twitched toward his. Their hands met, tentative at first, then locked together, his palm warm and firm against hers. Her tunic shifted as she turned to face him fully, the fabric pulling tight across her shoulders, her blonde waves falling forward to frame her face. His thumb brushed her knuckles, a slow rhythm that matched the pulse hammering in her ears, and she felt the couch beneath them like a silent witness, its cushions cradling the weight of their unraveling. The city glowed on, its lights flickering through the windows, but here, in this pocket of space, time stretched thin, held by the clasp of their hands, the unspoken question of what came next, and the forbidden thread that bound them tighter with every breath.